Bonjour, bienvenue à cette conférence de presse. My name is Guillaume Saint-Pierre from the Journal de Montréal, and I'll be your moderator. So with us today, we have Anita Anand, Minister of National Defense, et la ministre Mélanie Joly des Affaires étrangères. On me dit que nous allons avoir 20 minutes pour les questions après les déclarations d'ouverture. So we will have 20 minutes for questions after remarks. Ministers, go ahead.
Merci, Guillaume. Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, is under threat, under siege. Explosions are being felt as many seek refuge in subway stations. Babies are being born in underground shelters while Ukrainians from all walks of life are banding together to fight for their freedom, for the right to choose their own future. Russia has tried to make a mockery of our international system to force a reversion to a might makes right world. We will not make this happen. In addition to Putin's attempt to subjugate the free will of a sovereign nation by invading Ukraine, he has sought to sow division and discord amongst the alliance. This was a miscalculation. We are united, more united than ever before. This morning, the G7 foreign ministers met. We were joined by our Ukrainian counterpart. Inspired by the courage and resolve of the Ukrainian people, we are working together to suffocate the Russian regime. We are working in locksteps. Measures that were described as a last resort just days ago are now moving forward with consensus. The Russian regime is being hit from all angles with severe costs for their unjustified and unprovoked attack of Ukraine. They will feel the impacts of their actions financially and politically immediately and for years to come. The Russian regime and those who have enabled this crisis are increasingly isolated. Soon, there will be nowhere left for them to hide. En plus de sa tentative de soumettre la libre volonté d'une nation souveraine en envahissant l'Ukraine, le président Poutine a cherché à semer la division et la discorde au sein de l'Alliance. C'était un très mauvais calcul de sa part. Nous sommes unis, plus unis que jamais. Des mesures qui étaient décrites comme de dernier recours il y a quelques jours à peine sont maintenant mises en œuvre sans entrave et de manière coordonnée. Le régime russe ressentira les conséquences financières et politiques de son attaque injustifiée et non provoquée aujourd'hui et pour des années à venir. Le régime russe et ceux qui ont rendu possible cette crise sont de plus en plus isolés. Bientôt, ils n'auront plus aucun endroit où se cacher. Canada and its allies are working together to equip Ukraine with the tools they need to continue the fight. We hear their call for more help, and we're doing our part. This week, the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine asked me directly for more equipment to keep their fighters safe. They need helmets, body armor, gas masks, and night vision gear. I assured her Canada would deliver, and I meant it. Today, we are announcing that Canada will send an additional $25 million worth of this protective equipment to Ukraine. And let me be clear, we will send more. To ensure this equipment makes it to Ukraine as soon as possible, I've also worked with my Polish counterpart to secure transportation routes to their border to Ukraine. Together with my colleague, Minister of Defense, and specialist in terms of procurement, we will make sure it gets there. Cette semaine, la vice-première ministre ukrainienne m'a demandé directement plus d'équipements pour assurer la sécurité de ses combattants. Ils ont besoin de casques, de gilets pare-balles, de masques à gaz et de matériel de vision nocturne. Je lui ai assuré que le Canada allait livrer la marchandise. Aujourd'hui, nous annonçons que le Canada enverra pour 25 millions de dollars supplémentaires de cet équipement de protection à l'Ukraine. Et je veux être bien clair, nous avons l'intention d'en faire beaucoup plus. Afin que cet équipement arrive en Ukraine sans le moindre délai, j'ai également travaillé avec mon homologue polonais pour assurer que nous ayons des garanties sur une voie de passage jusqu'à leur frontière avec l'Ukraine. Avec ma collègue, la ministre de la Défense, nous veillerons à ce que le matériel arrive à destination. I'd like to finish by addressing Canadians who have family and friends in Russia. Please tell them what is happening in Ukraine. Send them pictures, videos of what you and we are all seeing through our own media and social media. The Russian regime has a very powerful propaganda machine. And that machine is selling falsehoods and lies about their motivation and invasion of Ukraine. The Russian people do not deserve to be at war with their neighbors, family, and friends in Ukraine. We all deserve to live in peace, and this madness needs to end. Thank you.
Merci, Mélanie, et bon après-midi tout le monde. Since the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the occupation of eastern Ukraine by Putin, we've been on the ground to help Ukraine defend its sovereignty and territorial integrity through a multifaceted and comprehensive approach, including by reinforcing NATO's eastern flank. Et aujourd'hui, je suis ici pour vous fournir une brève mise à jour sur notre réponse aux nouvelles actions inadmissibles de Poutine pour supporter nos amis ukrainiens dans le combat le plus important de leur vie. I'd like to send my very best to President Zelensky, Minister Resnikov, and the Ukrainian people for their strong resistance against Putin's naked aggression. In light of Ukraine's evolving needs and our commitment to continue to support Ukraine in coordination with allies and partners, we have now authorized the provision of an additional $25 million worth of non-lethal aid to our friends in Ukraine. As La Ministre Joly dit, this aid includes helmets, body armor, night vision goggles, and gas masks. This aid was requested by Ukraine, and we are working as quickly as possible to get it there as Ukraine continues its fight to exist. We have also approved today additional airlift support facilitated by the Canadian Armed Forces. The first aircraft will depart for Europe tomorrow, and the intent is for it to be used by NATO and in support of the delivery of this aid. This assistance builds on the ongoing work of our Canadian Armed Forces and the Communications Security Establishment. This support is multifaceted and is as follows. First, our CAF is working with the Communications Securities Establishment to provide Ukraine with experts in cybersecurity, including cyber threat intelligence, to help Ukraine defend its networks against cyber attacks that are increasingly forming part of modern-day warfare. I want to reassure Canadians that we do have the tools to keep Canadians and Canada's own cyber environment secure, and that I will remain in close contact with the Chief of the CSE, Shelley Bruce. Second, we must remember that our Canadian Armed Forces have helped to prepare more than 33,000 Ukrainian soldiers for the very circumstances that we are witnessing now through our training mission in Ukraine. And to those asking whether Canada will send troops to fight in Ukraine, a combat mission is not on the table at this time, nor is it on the table for our allies, including the United States. In fact, I had again a productive call on Thursday with my American counterpart, Secretary Austin. The buildup of troops in Europe is to enhance the deterrence on which the NATO alliance is built. We are always conscious that Article 5 of the Washington Treaty is the golden rule, that an attack on one is an attack on all. As we have previously stated, our CAF personnel previously in Ukraine are in Poland and safe, and are now preparing to ensure that we are ready to support with humanitarian efforts when required. third, the over $7 million worth of lethal aid for Ukraine has also now been delivered in full and in time to be effective. And lastly, we are reinforcing our support for NATO's eastern flank by expanding Operation Reassurance, which will further deter Russian aggression and maintain stability in the region. I spoke this morning with the Ministers of Defense of Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, and France, all of whom expressed their strong appreciation of Canada's ongoing efforts to reinforce NATO's eastern flank and the alliance's deterrence efforts more broadly. There also remains, across all branches of the service, 3,400 CAF personnel who are ready to be deployed to the NATO response force if called upon. The world has undoubtedly become a more dangerous place. While these dangers can sometimes seem far away to Canadians, our insularity is eroding as geopolitical fractures caused by the likes of sow chaos and uncertainty. Through these tumultuous times, we must unite as a country and redouble efforts to support our allies and trusted international partners. Je vais rester en contact étroit avec nos partenaires et alliés, incluant le ministre Reznikov, avec qui je continue de parler chaque jour. I will also remain in close contact with our Chief of Defense Staff and Chief of the CSE as this horrific, unconscionable situation unfolds to ensure that we are doing our part to help Ukraine defend its nation. Despite the horrendous and cruel nature of Putin's war, it is heartwarming to see our allies standing in unison in defense of democracy. L'heure est venue de nous rassembler avec une unité sans faille. Now's our time to come together with an unwavering unity of purpose. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you, ministers. We will now turn to questions. So as I said, we have 20 minutes. Just a reminder to try to mute yourself between your question and your follow-up. We will start with Rafi Boudjikanian.
Thank you very much. Perhaps the first question can be for Minister Anand. You mentioned keeping Canadians safe from cyber attacks. What reassurances can you offer given Russia's announcement this morning of its nuclear deterrent being put into place, I guess?
Okay, hi, Rafi. Let me take that question in two parts. First, let me address the second part of your question relating to nuclear. I would like to take this opportunity to denounce the bellicose and irresponsible rhetoric of Mr. Putin. Canada stands united with allies in face of his naked aggression, and the rhetoric relating to nuclear capability that we heard this morning is highly irresponsible, and we denounce it wholeheartedly. In terms of your question relating to cyber attacks and the threat posed to Canada, I would like to indicate that since 2019, we have had in place the authorities legislatively to allow the communication security establishment with the tools it needs to protect Canada and Canadians. Let's be clear that cyber attacks are part of the Russian playbook, and bolstering our cyber security and safeguarding our critical infrastructure is critical. It is top of mind, and it is the main priority that I discuss with our Chief of the CSE, Shelley Bruce, most recently on February 24th. The CSE will share valuable cyber threat information with Canadian critical infrastructure partners, and it has on numerous occasions issued warnings to Canadian organizations and businesses for them to take all precautions relating to cyber attacks and cybersecurity threats. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. And Minister Joly, if I can ask you, you were talking about the propaganda machine that Russia uses. So what are the challenges for Canada in banning the network Russia Today from Canadian airwaves, as Minister Rodriguez has suggested he would like to do?
Well, so I'll take also your question in two parts. So the first one is, obviously, we know that right now, Russian people are under a lot of under a very important misinformation campaign, and therefore we need, as a country, but also the entire West, to be able to send images, send information about what's going on in Ukraine to Russia in Russian. And so it is important for Canadians to be able to talk to their friends and families that would be in Russia, to make sure that they understand what's going on. This is one of the first time in her history that a very important war is happening on social media and on Facebook. And bit by bit, there are protests happening in Russia because people are understanding what is going on due to a bit of information they're gathering. We need to make sure that flow of information is even more bolstered. And so that's why I call on Canadians. On the question of disinformation, here at home and in the West and RT, definitely we want to make sure that RT be taken care of. That's exactly why, again, this morning I had a conversation with the Minister of Heritage, Pablo Rodriguez, and I know he's working on this as we speak. And we all agree that RT is a problem and that we will solve it. But I think that it is a question of RT on our broadcasting side, which Pablo Rodriguez is taking care of, but it's also RT and Sputnik and all the other misinformation, disinformation campaigns that are going on made by the Russian regime online. And that, obviously, we're looking at making sure that our social media companies do more to prevent any form of disinformation by these websites and by these different entities through their own networks.
Mylène Crête, La Presse.
Bonjour, Madame Joly. J'aimerais savoir comment vous accueillez la négociation qui devrait avoir lieu entre la Russie et l'Ukraine.
Écoutez, je vais être très franche avec vous. Je suis toujours d'accord avec la diplomatie. Je pense que c'est une bonne chose qu'on s'engage dans le dialogue. Le problème présentement, et là où justement ça me préoccupe énormément, c'est qu'il y a une énorme différence entre ce que la Russie a dit au cours des dernières semaines et comment elle a agi. Et étant donné que cette différence-là, ce delta-là est si grand, je suis très préoccupée par rapport au fait qu'il n'y ait pas nécessairement de cessez-le-feu ou encore de diminution des troupes à la frontière et en Ukraine. Donc, en ce sens-là, j'ai partagé mes préoccupations ce matin à mes collègues du G7 et même mes préoccupations à mon homologue ukrainien, Dmytro Kuleba, qui est avec nous ce matin avec les ministres du G7. Alors, voyons voir, mais je tiens juste à vous dire que je suis extrêmement préoccupée et entre-temps, je salue tous les efforts des Ukrainiens pour défendre leur pays face à cette invasion complètement insensée.
Avez-vous discuté du fait qu'il y a certaines villes qui seraient complètement encerclées par les militaires russes? Donc, j'imagine que ça pose des difficultés pour l'approvisionnement de nourriture, médicaments, etc.
C'est sûr qu'on recherche des façons de pouvoir approvisionner les Ukrainiens. C'est pourquoi je suis en contact avec différentes personnes au sein du gouvernement ukrainien à tous les jours. Et c'est pourquoi aussi c'était si important de pouvoir parler à la Pologne, parce que certainement, une des routes d'approvisionnement importantes est celle qui passe par la Pologne. Mais j'ai été en contact aussi avec mes autres homologues de tous les autres pays limitrophes, que ce soit la Moldavie, la Roumanie, la Slovaquie et encore la Hongrie, parce que, bien entendu, ils ont aussi des façons des points d'entrée en Ukraine qui sont parfois plus difficiles que la Pologne, mais qui sont tout de même des points d'entrée.
Merci.
Libertium, Canadian Press.
Yes, thank you. This question is for Minister Joly. Earlier today on at least one of the political television shows, you described Russian President Vladimir Putin as, I believe, irrational. I'm wondering if that was just a slip of the tongue, or if you actually, and you and the government believe that, and if you do believe that, if that is the case, how do you negotiate with somebody like that, and how worried should Canadians be about a nuclear war?
Well, nobody that decides to bombard a sovereign nation, such as Ukraine, can be rational in doing so. So we all agree that there is a level of irrationality to what is happening in the decision-making that President Putin is doing. And while doing so, he's not only isolating his nation, but also will affect his very own people, because there is clearly a very strong push on the part of the UK, the EU, the United States, and us, and more countries around the world to send a very clear message to Putin. So, like I mentioned in French, Lee, I'm very preoccupied with how Russia has not only decided to I'm very preoccupied with the fact that there's been a difference between what Russia has said over the past weeks and how they've acted. And so in that sense, any form of diplomatic talks is preoccupying me right now. And I'm not the only one in the world, because clearly the trust in the Russian regime is pretty much at zero at this point. So I mentioned that to my Ukrainian counterpart. I was not the only one to be preoccupied by that. But at the same time, we need to continue to deliver goods and aid, may it be lethal or non-lethal, to Ukrainians as they're under siege and as they're fighting for their freedom.
And my follow-up is to Minister Anand. With this talk about Russian nuclear forces being put at a state of high readiness, NORAD officials have been warning for years about the need for NORAD modernization. The head of NORAD in December, during a visit to Ottawa, said he was awaiting political direction from both you and the Secretary of Defense in the United States on a political framework. Can you provide an update on where we're at with NORAD modernization? Has that political direction been given?
So thanks for the question. I am going to say that the NORAD modernization piece is extremely important to me and to our government. And in particular, we are going to continue to make critical major investments in personnel, equipment, and infrastructure that will support continental defense and enhance our capabilities to respond to emerging security challenges, including in Canada's north. I have had a number of conversations with my counterpart, Secretary of Defense Austin, about NORAD modernization. And these include making significant investments to the North Warning System. In fact, we recently awarded a $592 million contract to Inuit-owned Nasittuq Corporation for the operation and maintenance of the North Warning System. The bottom line is that we will remain firm and unwavering in defending Canada's sovereignty, the peoples and communities of the North, and our national interests. And NORAD modernization is a central aspect of this prioritization. Thank you.
Mike Drolet de Global.
Thank you very much. Clearly, Ukraine is in need of munitions and gear, and as you've announced, Canada is now sending $25 million worth of gear. Russia, for obvious reasons, I would imagine, would not want that gear to arrive in Ukraine, as it won't want any guns or ammunition to come from any other countries. I know that you're flying it in, not into directly into Ukraine and going over the border, but now that you've announced it and Russia knows it's coming, do you not suppose that Russia will do everything they can not to allow it to get into the hands of the Ukrainians?
Thank you, Mike. Anita and I won't speculate as to what are the intentions of Russia. But what we can tell you both is that it is important for Canada to step up and to help. And not only that, I would say, we're not the only ones in the world doing so. Today, the EU announced that they would be providing lethal aid, and that's their first time in their own history. And so in that sense, we want to make sure that we look at all options possible to deliver lethal aid. Yes, we're working with Poland, but we're having many conversations with many countries to make sure that the delivery is possible. Go ahead, Anita.
Okay, thanks. First of all, let's be clear. Only Putin knows what Putin will do. And we will work as hard as we can to deliver this aid as quickly and as prudently as possible. We were successful in delivering our first package and our second package of lethal aid on the ground in Ukraine. And we have the logistics expertise and the relationships with our allies to ensure that we are secure when we are delivering our aid. So I will say that this particular package today, which is $25 million of non-lethal aid, is going to, in the first instance, be transported to Europe via Hercules, and the Canadian Armed Forces will be assisting. And we will continue to make sure that we are taking all precautions so that our aid reaches Ukraine safely and securely and gets into the hands of the people that need it. Thank you.
Thank you. And my follow-up question is about Belarus, which has been home to some Russian armaments, and they've been launching rockets into Ukraine from Belarus. And there's been reports that Belarus is now getting ready to enter this fight and enter the war. Does that change anything for Canada and for Canada's allies in terms of how, in terms of the response towards this conflict?
If I may, we know that Belarus has been facilitating Russian troops through their borders for some time. And we know that the Belarus regime has been an issue. That's why this summer we sanctioned President Lukashenko directly. And that's why this week, on Friday, we announced 50 more sanctions against Belarus. And we will continue to put maximum pressure on Belarus. This is clearly a priority for us, but not only us, I would say the entire G7 and the alliance, because we know that Belarus and the Russian regimes are working hand in hand against Ukraine right now. And so in that sense, we will continue to impose maximum pressure on Belarus as we're doing with against Russia as well.
Stephen Chase, Globe and Mail.
Hi, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. My question is for Minister Anand. And the first question is, the Ukrainian government, Mr. Zelensky, has called on foreigners to join the fight against Russia in Ukraine. They're going to be forming a foreign legion of volunteers. And the British Foreign Secretary Liz Truss said she would support Britain's going abroad to help this fight. So I have the same question for you, Minister Anand. Would you support Canadians joining this Ukrainian Foreign Legion to fight Russia? Would you counsel them against it? What would your position be on that?
I will respond initially and then ask my colleague Melanie if she would like to add anything. But we have advised Canadians not to travel to Ukraine for security reasons. We understand this is a fight for Ukraine's motherland, and we understand the desire to go. But our responsibility as a government is to indicate the security risks with undertaking travel to Ukraine. We are doing our part to support while keeping Canadians and Canadian Armed Forces personnel safe. Mel?
Thanks, Anita. Well, obviously, a couple of things. We've said to people in Ukraine since February 1st to leave Ukraine. We've also said to people in Canada not to go to Ukraine because of security reasons. That has been our travel advisory for now some time. At the same time, we understand that people of Ukrainian descent want to support their fellow Ukrainians, and also that there's a desire to defend the motherland. It's their own individual decisions, but let me be clear: we are all very supportive of any form of support to Ukrainians right now. That's why today we're announcing non-lethal aid, body armor, night gear, very important equipment. And that's why also we need to do more, and we know that we will be doing more in the coming days.
Okay, it sounds like you're saying it's up to them if they want to travel over there. And my second question is regarding just clarifying the prospects for, and this is for obviously Minister Anand, but obviously I would like to hear from Minister Joly if she wants to respond as well. Just want to clarify the prospect for more weapons to Ukraine. Are you shutting the door to more weapons for Ukraine, including, for instance, anti-tank weapons, or are you preparing or looking for opportunities to send more weapons to Ukraine?
Okay, thanks, Steve. Let's start off by saying here that at this time, any support we can give to Ukraine is helpful to their military. And we continue to assess daily what we can provide to the Ukrainian people, as Melanie just said. Your question related to additional lethal aid, and I do support a multifaceted approach to the examination of what aid will be provided. And indeed, Minister Resnikov and I have on a number of occasions discussed the types of aid that would be useful for the Ukrainian army. Additional lethal aid is not off the table. We are working with our allies at the current time to determine who can provide what and how fast. And as those discussions ensue, we will have more clarity about what we can do from a Canadian perspective. Thank you. Mel?
Thank you. Well, I just mentioned it in another question, Steve. You saw today the EU announced for the first time in their history the importance, the fact that they would be sending lethal aid as a group. And so we're doing that. They've done that. We know that we've already sent lethal aid. There's been 2 shipments of lethal aid that were sent successfully because of the great work of CAF members. And at the same time, we know that we need to do more because Kyiv is under threat. Ukraine is clearly under siege. And that's why we will coordinate with allies as we're looking at different options, like Anita just mentioned.
So it seems that we are all out of time. I was wondering, ministers, there's 2 people that would like to ask questions. So I was thinking maybe they could split a question and the follow-up if you have a few minutes more, that would be great. Do you agree? And so Ryan and Palak could... No, actually, I think Ryan left. Oh, he's still there. So Ryan, maybe you can start, and then Palak, you could get the follow-up. Thank you, ministers.
Yeah, this question's for Minister Joly. You talked in your opening statement about encouraging Canadians with Russian family to send images to Russia of what is really happening on the ground in Ukraine. I'm wondering, with some of your language, are you hoping to see more than just Russian troops back in Russia, but also maybe some sort of political change or regime change in Russia as well?
Thank you, Ryan, for your question. First and foremost, we need to put maximum pressure on the Russian regime. The entire G7 members can do so, and we are doing so politically, economically, and we're supporting Ukraine through different means, including lethal aid. But at the same time, it is important that people in Russia understand what is going on. And also, we're seeing protests happening in Moscow, in St. Petersburg, in many cities across Russia. This is an incredible, it's an incredible sign of courage by these own protesters, because we know that protesting in Russia is something that is condemned by the regime. In that sense, we want to see that Russians are aware that the protesters are protesting based on information, facts, and basically the true reality that is happening south of the border. That is also why it is important for Canada to have an ambassador in Russia. It is important for Canada to know what is going on the ground and to hear what are the different movements of population that are happening in Russia. And so that would be my answer to your question.
Lastly, Palak Mangat.
Hi, ministers. Thanks for sticking around. I just had a question for Minister Anand. You said that some equipment has already landed on Ukrainian soil to, quote, be effective. Can you just sort of explain how you can be assured that it is being effective, what the benchmark you're using to say that is? Is it merely that it's landed there as per your timelines, or that it was physically in the hands of Ukrainian people? And just moving forward, how do you measure its effectiveness? Or its impact, if not in helping with deterrence?
Okay, thank you for the question. So we have trained approximately 33,000 Ukrainian soldiers since 2015. And in delivering both lethal and non-lethal aid, that aid was received by the Canadian Armed Forces on the ground in Ukraine prior to the further invasion by Russia last Thursday. And the Canadian Armed Forces were able to hand over the aid to the Ukrainian soldiers and to assist them and explain to them what this aid was and would be used for. And so let's be clear that the work that we have done as a country and as the Canadian Armed Forces to build the relationships with the Ukrainian army has been fundamental to the transfer of both lethal and non-lethal aid. And what we have done is to extend Operation Unifier for another 3 years. And while that operation is suspended temporarily, we very much hope that it will continue so that we will be able to provide the Ukrainian army with the training that we have been providing over the past 7 years. So in direct answer to your question, how can I be sure? Because the Canadian Armed Forces who were on the ground in Ukraine told me that they had delivered that aid and it had been received. And I trust what they say to me. Thank you.
On met fin à cette conférence de presse. Merci, mesdames les ministres, d'être restés un peu plus longtemps. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.